to the MUNpinion podcast with
Kyla,
Casey,
and Carol.
Look at us today.
Hello.
We're doing so well, right?
No.
I feel like I'm doing half well. Medium rare, I guess, is what one could equate. Yes.
Medium well? Well, you said half well.
That's fair, I guess. Well, because I was thinking of like halfway through the scale of like well done to rare. Medium rare isn't that.
Delegate.
No, that's just medium.
Delegate.
Well
What
done
is
is
it?
rare.
Is it just no, it's just medium. Yes.
Is this
Decorum.
I'm going to look favorably upon a motion to open debate.
motion to open debate?
That is in order. All those in favor?
Aye.
Debate is now open.
Since apparently I don't understand the scale of steak wellness or burger wellness, I guess I'm just medium.
It goes well to rare, right?
I know, yeah, but I thought that for some reason I thought the midpoint was medium rare. It's not. It's medium, which
For all
makes
those
sense.
who are just joining us on the podcast, Kyla and Caroline are arguing about temperature of steak and doneness,
And
whether
how that
Kyla
correlates.
is medium well or medium rare right now.
I'm
I would
medium
say
rare
you're-
because I feel like I'm closer to worse, but we're
is
not going to
rare
get into
better
the
or worse?
logistics of this.
Okay, let's just, I want to just
Yeah.
put a disclaimer for all this happening right now. It's final season.
It is.
We are all on our last leg,
Very
but
tired.
we're only halfway through.
We're only like a week away from it being done, but it's already been a week, which is the issue.
Yeah.
It's been
The way
like
that
3
our
days,
school does
and we
it-
have like 3 days left.
The way that the school does it, I feel like it's so much longer than it needs to be, and just, boy oh boy, are we in it. Because Carol and I right now are working on our undergraduate theses, which, no, thank you. I'm 20 pages into like a 30-page paper that's due Monday, so... we can celebrate my birthday, which is also
Yeah.
on Monday.
Yep.
A new podcast episode, and also us submitting our final theses. So it's going to be a really big day.
So when
on
you're
that.
listening, they'll be done.
Yeah,
And then I
you'll
still
know.
have at this point, I still have another paper and
too.
another Russian final to take. But other than that,
Other than that, yeah, I have a
I'm doing
8-page
so well.
Spanish paper to do. Which,
I mean, I have like my cinema paper is going to be like 5 pages.
Yeah, but
For
Kyla
real.
got some good news today, right?
I did.
Yeah.
I got a job today. I got a big girl, real person job.
And that's the one we were referencing last episode that we knew you were going to get it.
Thank you. It's very exciting. I will be working at a nonprofit doing government relations work, which is super mega exciting. It's where I interned, so it's nice that they were like, I don't know, they liked me enough to keep me around or whatever, but they're great. I don't think any of them listen. I think my supervisor knows that I have a podcast, but I don't think that I actually ever told her the name. But hey, if any of y'all are listening, I can't wait to come back. I'll see you in like a month.
So today on my docket, I woke up at 6:30 a.m., took an advanced Arabic final. I am not at the level of advanced Arabic. I don't think anybody in my class is at the level of advanced Arabic. So I sweat that out at approximately 8 a.m. today. And then got some coffee, got my thesis project signed off on for next year because I am a wee junior who's not graduating early. And then finished some writing. I actually managed to solve the Syrian humanitarian crisis
Wow.
in 6 pages.
Congratulations.
Wow, congrats on that.
Yeah,
So exciting.
Pat on the back. That's just one of the things I've done today. So
No, congrats.
probably got like a C on an Arabic final, solved the Syrian humanitarian crisis, got a pretty good coffee.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
no.
in a day's work, man.
Those caramel ice lattes, man.
You know exactly what I was
I
at.
know exactly. I saw you with it when
Yep.
I came out of my room after, hiding in my cave for a while, and it looked delicious.
Yeah, I actually spilled about half of it on Caroline's Russian homework.
Did you really?
Yeah, but somehow
Oh.
it didn't stain, so we're good.
It's okay because I'm not turning it in a study guide. I've already put all the answers for it on Google Drive.
Oh, that's so
I have them
proactive of you.
for
I also
posterity.
turned in a final paper that was a group project today, and it was me and 4 freshmen working on it, which created some interesting dynamics. None of them listened, so it was not the best experience, but it's okay. But I found out today that one of our friends thought that the page limit was 10 pages and the page minimum was 10 pages. So they cut out an entire section of the paper and just submitted it, which is very bold to do.
That is a bold move.
But hey, get the job done if you have to.
Speaking of getting the job done,
Wow.
what are we?
That segue was
Look, man,
amazing.
Sometimes I'm really on my segue game.
Hey, who wants to say what the episode is actually about today?
You can go ahead.
All right. Today we are talking about changes on the Model UN circuit. So just to give a point of reference, Kyla, Caroline, and I have been on the circuit for 3 years. They've both been to one extra conference or
7 conferences.
Yeah, and I've been to 6. We hopefully have some experience. I know a lot of teams travel to a lot more per year.
Oh, yeah.
But our team has just recently started upping the amount we go to. So it was really fun to do that and see that and be able to be more involved. That's just a disclaimer to why if we say, like, we're juniors and seniors, we've been to basically the amount we can.
Yeah, we've gone to the maximum.
We've been to what some people go to in a year.
Yeah, which
is insane.
I don't know. It's been good and bad as far as, like, my perspective on the kind of MUN that we do. One, I think it's kind of nice that we go to less because as soon as we started upping the amount of conferences that we go to, it became a lot more stressful. There was a lot more work that had to be done, and it's hard to get that turnover because our team isn't big. Some teams roster 40 people, so being able to turn over teams is really easy. Yeah. We roster maybe half of that. Yeah. So it's hard to do, but I think that we've all gotten a pretty wide range of experience as far as, like, what we've seen.
Yeah, and just speaking to the amount of team members, our team does have about 30 people currently active, which is something we worked really hard on growing this past year. But in reality, when we're trying to take, delegations of 12 to 16 to conferences that we're going to, now that we bumped up the schedule every other week sometimes, multiple weekends in a row, it's really hard to find that many people willing to travel that often. Yeah. And I understand it's a big time commitment and it's exhausting, honestly.
Yeah, and, like, especially when conferences are scheduled for, because a lot of them in the fall are in October, November-ish, just because obviously logistically that's when you can make it work. And so that's getting close to when classes are really ramping up and getting into a lot of material and you have a lot of assignments due, because it's not like syllabus time anymore. But definitely some of the amount of conferences that teams go to is astounding. Like, I heard one team that I was talking to, they said they go to, like, 14 conferences a year.
I don't even know how you do that because...
Like, it's so much money.
Because at that point, first of all, your funding has to be crazy.
Insane.
Second of all, you have to have quite either a large team or a very, very dedicated body. But I hesitate to even say dedicated because we have a lot of dedicated team members. Yeah. And I wouldn't expect someone to give up that many weekends. Even if they're only going to half of those a semester, that would be around, I guess, 3 to 4 a semester if you're going to 14 per year.
No, especially if it's like a Thursday to Sunday conference. That means you're missing at least 7 Thursday classes.
And it seems like there are a lot of members of teams that go to almost every conference. And I just don't know how you go to 4 to 5 conferences a semester. I mean, I went to, 3 this year?
3 in each semester, I think, is, like, an ideal.
Yeah.
Personally. And even that is pushing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, also one thing I wanted to talk about before we get into it is I know we've mentioned best delegate rankings before and the tier rankings. So, I don't want to spend too much time on discussing that, but does someone want to just give a quick overview on, rankings of teams and rankings of conferences and how they kind of, because there are rankings of, the top teams in the country, and they do decide that, and they do weight different conferences differently. So when we refer to a harder, quote-unquote, harder conference or a higher tier conference and differences we see between different tiers, that's what we're going to be referring to.
So obviously I don't have the best delegate. They have a whole methodology section. Essentially what it is they rank the top 25 teams in the country. Numerically. That's based on what conferences they go to, how many awards they pull, what kind of awards they pull, like best delegate, outstanding, honorable, verbal, things like that. It's kind of a weird cycle of that feeds into their tier ranking of conferences. So the harder conferences are going to be the ones that more highly ranked teams go to, like more top 25 teams. And then they do a top 50.
The top 50 isn't numerically ranked, but they do say which 10 teams are the closest to entering the top 25. But those are also not numerically numerical. It's all alphabetical outside of that.
So they do, the 1 to 25, and then a chunk of top 50, and then a chunk of top 75.
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about that.
Yeah, and conferences, to go a little bit into that, I don't know that much about how they choose their conferences outside of like who attends, how many people attend, what kind of topics they have, what kinds of committees they have, how many they have.
I think scale goes
like
into
how
it.
big it is, and also they look at the award ratios and like what teams are awarding there, and like how many top 25 teams are attending is really big.
It's kind of, if you think, I know I do a lot of basketball analogies, like I called Best Delegate the ESPN of Model UN one time.
It is.
But it's kind of on how they rank conferences within basketball leagues. So like the Big East is ranked a certain amount, and so if teams within the Big East do better, then that conference ranks higher. So think about, you know, the individual teams, and then how they perform in the conferences changes the conferences themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah, pretty much.
But that's some good context. So moving forward, we're going to be talking about things that we've seen that we believe have changed since we were freshmen starting out to now. And everything that we're saying, like, as a disclaimer, we're not trying to call anybody out. We're not trying to critique anything. It's just things that we've noticed. And they might be positive, they might be negative, but we're not trying to call it any specific conference or teams or anything like that. So please don't read into anything.
And
it's just what we've seen.
Granted, it's only been 3 years and 6 or 7 conferences and like 20 conferences between us. That pales in comparison to obviously what Casey and I were talking about earlier with some teams. So this might be things that we've seen that other people haven't seen, or maybe some people feel the same way we do.
And that's why we always reach out to get your opinions. So the more you guys give us what you've seen and give us your anecdotes, the more well-rounded we can make this podcast, because we can really only talk from our own standpoints.
Yeah.
Hopefully you guys, if you're listening, are interested in what our standpoints are or what our viewpoints are. And we are very interested in what your viewpoints are. So if we reach out and ask for opinions or anecdotes, every time we see them come in, we get so excited. We always read them together. And we can't wait to share what we've heard or what we've learned on the podcast. So like we've always said, reach out, feel free. We're very excited every time someone does.
For sure.
So just to get started, I think we can segue into this because last episode we kind of decided on air to do this episode because I started going into a tangent about how I've seen directives change over time.
Oh, yeah.
So I've kind of already given my piece if you listened to the last episode. If you haven't, just to summarize, and, you know, Caroline and Kyla threw in some of their ideas, what I've seen is more directives being written, more directives being written very quickly without a lot of committee input. And then there's a lot of other facets that go into that, and I don't want to kind of summarize everything that we'll discuss, but, you know, feel free to jump in.
No, absolutely. Like, the pace of directive writing has increased tremendously, and in my opinion, that has also been correlated with a decrease in quality. They're usually really short directives that get very little done, and generally speaking, have no debate associated with them. So at that point, I don't know why we bother. I understand that, you know, sponsoring directives is a part of awards. It is. And, you know, making legislation for the committee that you're in is important. However, people trying to bang out 20 directives in one session, singular sponsorships where they're the only person writing it, that's not a directive.
No.
And that's partially up to, you know, the dais to make those standards and say how many sponsors there should be, but just, and also, like, there are people from very, very good teams that write directives with no formatting at all. It's incorrectly formatted every single time, and it shocks me because, like, these are the basics. I don't know, I think it comes with how fast people are writing, so they make mistakes.
2 lines and 1 sponsor does not a directive make.
Correct.
When you say investigate all members of this committee, report back to the committee,
something?
that oh my god,
crisis doesn't even they don't even agree. It never turns into anything.
In my last committee, we probably passed about 5 or 6 directives that were like, investigate this member of the committee, investigate this member of the committee. They never returned to us with an investigation thing, and I brought it up. I'm like, we need to stop doing this, and guess what we continued to debate? After that, it was investigation directives.
Something that you mentioned that I really think is true is the single sponsorship.
Oh my god, yeah.
Because here's, for example, you know, I want to say, like, pretty vague when we discuss things, But I was at a conference, and during the opening crisis scene, so just, you know, I know probably most of the people listening do MUN, but for those who don't, the beginning committee, everyone sits down. Usually it happens before even debate starts. The crisis team comes in and almost does a little skit to really set the tone and set the starting point for debate and committee.
It's fun.
Yeah, it's really fun. They're usually really good, too, because they plan them out really heavily in advance because they already know what they're going to do. So during that opening skit, one of the delegates across from me was furiously writing a directive. And the directive ended up being like over a page long.
Oh my god.
He was the only sponsor on it. It addressed what we would have discussed as a committee, but it almost shortcutted debate by doing that. So everyone was just like, I guess we'll just pass this then. And that's what really frustrates me because maybe we can go in and discuss how committees, I feel, aren't as divisive maybe as they used to be. And so people do bang out these directives they know will pass clearly because everyone's going to agree with them. So there's no debate. Debate gets stale. And people are just writing directives before we have a time to discuss it. And that's what frustrates me to no end because directives should really be a collective, you know, effort and collective unit.
Exactly. And I mean, crisis is, in its conception, a product of General Assembly. And you would never introduce a resolution without debating it. So it's a very similar idea. Is like directives are supposed to be small resolutions that are based upon committee action based upon debate. So you trying to make personal actions via directive is just a waste of everybody's time. Send it as a crisis note, like at that point.
And that gets into joint crisis notes, which I don't think I had ever done them until I was forced to do them in an adjusted crisis committee. And they started off, I think, saying we had to have 4 people on a note. And I was like, that's absolutely ridiculous. They ended up reducing it to 2, and then I think it just became full crisis. But I've seen so many more joint crisis notes.
It's been a big thing
lately. I think it has its merits, but I also think it goes back to committee not being as divisive because part of me is very selfish and wants my own crisis arc and doesn't want to share it with anybody and doesn't want to create a new arc.
I think that's part of crisis.
Or share, or like if I do well, part of me wants to be like, yeah, I did that crisis arc with like the limited resources that I had. But then another part of me is like, it would really be helpful if I could get someone else in on this, but then I don't trust anybody.
That's the
biggest thing. And so I don't want to share my entire arc with you, and then you go and like snake me.
Here's my one counterpoint to that. I have never done a joint crisis note that related directly to my own personal arc.
No. It always has to be a different arc.
And I understand what you mean about, but I don't want to write this note and have this big committee action happen and then have the other authors of the note flip on me in committee because you don't want that.
And they very well could or would.
Basically, my thing for joint crisis notes is it feels almost like a product of a couple people had this good idea previously and they did it and crisis was wowed by it and now every single other team is like, this is how we award. So we're going to teach everybody to do joint crisis notes.
One of the main ways I think I've taken to using it is if a directive fails that myself and someone else that I was working with had written, then we pass a joint crisis note basically trying to do the same thing. And then if they shoot it down again, then we say, oh, this isn't working.
Yeah, that's a good alternative.
Yeah, because then I don't have to involve my own arc.
Since we've been talking about directives and joint crisis notes, I think we can also talk about voting procedure.
For sure.
This is something haven't seen to the greatest extent, but I know that a delegate of ours talked about seeing it this year on the circuit at a conference none of us attended. The amount of times people go into 1 for 1 against or 2 for 2 against on directives that don't even need to be voted on.
Yeah, I can speak to this somewhat at a conference that I attended this year at a committee that I was in that neither of you were in. The first 2 days we were in voting procedure, I want to say probably 75% of the time. Not debating, just voting. Because of that goes back to the directive thing where it's like when you're banging out 30 directives that are garbage and everybody
everyone's trying to make their own name and it just gets lost with everybody else trying to do the same thing.
Exactly. And I respect the game. Everyone wants to get noticed by the chair. Yeah. Everyone wants to flex. Everyone wants to do a good job. Great. Me too. But if you are doing a 1 for 1 against on your directive just because you want another tally next to your name for speaking, why? You're wasting everybody's time. Let's get back into real debate where your speech actually matters. That I would much rather you engage in that way. Yeah. And I have no problem with people wanting to speak. We all want to speak. It's just that's not the way to do it. At least in my opinion, I just feel like it's a waste of everybody's time.
Yep.
Or this is honestly kind of a weird byproduct is that since we're seeing so many directives just be pumped out, the chairs are begging people to combine.
Oh, they're begging every single time.
Yeah, and I can understand two sponsors saying, our directives are really similar. Hey, I'll just add you onto my sponsors list. We can, like, nix this one out. That's chill. That's fine. I don't get that. I saw two people with completely different 2-page documents staple them together just for
That's
the sake...
not combining.
Yeah, just for the sake
That
of
is
having a
so
quote-unquote combined
common.
directive.
That is so common. I absolutely saw that too, where it's just people stapling documents together. Again, going back to GA, you would never see that happen with 2 resolutions, so it shouldn't happen with 2 directives.
No,
They're different things.
They staple them together, and then they go and divide the question into their own separate directives.
And you think it's a finesse, and you think that it's some
not a
Harley
finesse.
Pro flex, like, ooh, look at me, I know how to divide the question.
Whoa!
But when you're dividing the question on every directive, it loses its fancy real quick.
Yeah, and also, at a certain point, once you're an experienced sophomore on the circuit, you know all the Parley Pro tricks.
You know the tricks. No
And
one's stupid.
I feel like everyone hits a point where they're, a freshman, they don't really know all the ins and outs.
Yeah.
They don't know all the tricks.
Yeah.
Then they hit a point where they're like, look at me, I can flex these tricks. And then they hit that other point where they're thinking, this is ridiculous. I know what trick you're trying to pull.
Back to the debate?
Yeah, can we just get back to what we're here to do instead of you trying to look like you're super cool by dividing the question?
100%. And I mean, this is kind of separate, but I think we've been talking about, like, a similar topic for a while. So, like, to move off of that, I think we should talk about committee structure and committee themes. Because for me, we're at a really interesting spot in the MUN universe right now.
Yeah.
In that I think MUN is getting bigger and, it's getting older too, which means that a lot of topics have been done, especially when you're talking about, major historical conflicts. So when conferences are trying to figure out new committee ideas, it's hard, and I 100% get that.
Oh, yeah.
I was SecGen for our conference. They were both on our senior sec. It's hard to come up with new ideas. But I think that people are choosing topics that are, A, super, super outlandish. And if you're going to do something like that, it takes insane amounts of planning.
Perfect.
They can be executed very well. And we've seen that. Casey's ad hoc is a really big example of that, of a weird committee structure, but it worked great.
Yeah.
I feel like that's not happening as much, though.
Yeah.
Nope.
Like, it's just people are throwing out these topics that seem great on paper, but in application, they fail. And that's a real bummer. And I know that it's hard, and I know that people don't want to see trite topics, but it's just like you would like to see that extra effort put in so they work better.
Yeah. Like, the next conference, I see a JCC Cold War. The next one.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And that's not shade to conferences that do JCC Cold Wars. It's just that
I think they can be really fun, but
They
they
can
always
be
do
really
it like
fun.
USSR versus USA,
And there's so much more you can do with it.
like the one we saw that was East versus West Berlin, I thought was cool.
That's interesting.
that was interesting.
And even if you did, like, I kind of like the idea of doing a Cold War, but not a JCC.
Yeah.
So, like, you could do the U.S. during that time, but use some really interesting characters that aren't just cabinet members.
Yeah,
like
get
get
Hollywood during the
get
Cold
some
War.
Hollywood people, like
Like
that
the
sort
Red
of
Scare
stuff.
kind of.
Like,
That'd
there's
be really
ways you
cool.
can do it, and also like McCarthy era would be a really cool thing to do. Like, I don't know. There's ways like this. There are ways that you can make trite topics unique, but they also take work. And I
Yeah.
just feel like it's not happening
And
as
I
much.
think going off of that, we're seeing people pull out topics that I think in my head sound really interesting and really cool, and then I show up for debate that day, and I realize everyone has the same opinion, so there's nothing to debate about. And that's especially what contributes to the directive problem, is everyone's writing the same directives because everyone has the same ideas for solutions because everyone is on the same track. And all of the positions, even if they're written to be combative, like at the end people are forced into certain roles and no one's ever going to play their position perfectly. So you end up with nothing to debate.
That's my issue is since probably freshman year, have wanted our team to do a Seneca Falls Convention training. And it's really hard to make that into a crisis because there's not really anything you could do that would affect it. But then it's also one of those things of like, who are you going to put in there that is anti-women's rights? Like, I mean, there are obviously figures you could do, but who's going to go in there and say women should not have the right to vote?
That's a big part of it too, is like, in a lot of these really contentious situations historically, you can't play them out because then you're having people be racist and sexist and awful. But on that same point of, tone and appropriateness in committee, I've seen a really nice change to get into the positives of conferences not putting up with misogyny and aggressive delegates. I love that because I am so sick of these men, and I'm not going to say what schools they're from, but they're from really good schools, and they come in and they dominate committees. They don't put women on sponsors lists. They shut them down speaking. They don't invite them into unmods, regardless of if the girl has a powerful position or not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, they're not involved. And I don't like the boys club mentality. Clearly, this is a podcast of all women, and I think we're all on the same page. But it's really nice to see secretariats nip that in the bud real quick.
Someone was disqualified from awards in your committee because of that, weren't they?
Exactly, which is really nice to see because he was super aggressive needlessly and was doing that thing with sponsors where he would take people off sponsors lists and was just needlessly going about this in a way that was not diplomatic. And at its core, Model UN is supposed to be diplomatic. So you being a jerk all the time does not represent those values. So it was nice to see them take action on it.
I completely agree. And I definitely think that in the future we're going to have an episode
for sure.
all about being a woman in Model UN and what that entails and what we've seen, and talk about some of the other things we've heard about on the circuit. So that should be an interesting episode.
Oh, yeah. I mean, with that, we could definitely segue into, loose Parley Pro.
Yeah, of course.
Just because I feel like debate when I was a freshman was so much more formal.
Mm-hmm.
And crosstalk was absolutely not tolerated. The amount, the increase in crosstalk that I've seen during mods and voting procedure is obscene. Mm-hmm. And occasionally they'll get called out for it, but it's only when someone else brings it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't ever want to be that delegate that's like, excuse me, chair, they're cross-talking because I don't want to be a snitch or, I want people to work with me. But I hate
feedback. No, I absolutely agree. And I don't know if it's because, and I think I speak for all of us when I say this doesn't mean that we're looking for really hardline chairs because that's difficult to work under too. People that chairs that get sassy when you mess up Parley Pro
or that don't know Parley Pro.
But then you also don't want someone who doesn't know Parley Pro and runs the room like it's just everyone hanging out.
It's a conversation.
You need to find a middle ground, and I think that I've had some chairs, and I know we all have, that are fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Incredible at their jobs, know exactly what they're doing. They toe that line perfectly.
They know how to control
amazing. But I do think that there has been definitely a loosening up and a casualness.
There comes a point where, like Casey was talking about earlier, where you don't know Parley Pro, then you know Parley Pro really well, and you're just running it strictly super formal Parley Pro, and then you hit that point where you know it so well that you can run it and control a room, but it's like a conversation. Mm-hmm. And you don't feel stuck to the rules, and you can bend them a little bit here and there, but then you always go back to the same format, and it's such a skill set that so few people have.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think that I've been lucky to have some really great chairs. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've ever had a chair that really made me angry or anything that I felt super frustrated. And I do understand the difficulty of, as Kyla's mentioned many times before, we've all been on a secretariat.
All been on dioceses too.
Yeah.
I was USG of crisis committees this year, and I understand the difficulties of trying to find good chairs
it's hard.
that know Parley Pro, because at a certain point, the people who really, really, really know it, like the back of their hand, are on secretariat. Mm-hmm. And so then you have to decide who is good at Parley Pro that can also run a room. And I can understand when conferences run into problems where they have so many committees, so they have to kind of get chairs who might not know Parley Pro that well. But then at that point, I guess I can also say to understand the limitations of your own club and not to overrun conferences.
And also to teach your staff. Learning Parley Pro, frankly, is not that difficult.
No.
So we teach our staff as much as we possibly can, and we work really hard at that, and we pride ourselves in that. And I mean, sometimes people fall through the cracks and aren't that great, but I just think, again, the responsibility in the end does fall upon the conference to make sure that the people that they're staffing are adequate, and also that they have the same standards uniformly across the whole conference, because some rooms will be super strict, some will be super loose, and what they're expecting isn't uniform. So then we go into head del feedback and we're like, well, this room was this and this room was that, and I don't know, it's I don't know, makes things weird.
So I think now we can segue into listener feedback. As we said before, we love getting feedback.
Please DM us. It makes us so happy.
Yes, it truly does. So, shout out to those who DM'd us for this time to talk about the differences they've seen on the circuit. Does anybody want to go ahead and talk about that?
This has been said, and it's something we've definitely noticed too, is that a lot of conferences will have the same committees. And I don't know if that's people genuinely just coming up with the same ideas, but at some points, when it reaches, like, more than a certain amount of committees, like, more than, you know, 1 or 2 committees are the same, it gets to the point of, like, are you taking committees from other conferences? Like, are you looking at their websites and seeing what committees they have and saying, oh, that's great, and it's like a thing of, you know, here's my work, but don't copy it completely, where you word things differently and then market it as basically the same thing.
And I think that this plays into what we were talking about before of, like, you know, you run out of topics at a certain point. And I also can't fault people, like we were saying with, for example, JCCs of the Cold War. That's a historical thing. You can't get mad because that's a historical thing. But then when you see fantasy committees looking the same, you see made up futuristic committees looking the same, that's a little bit more strange to me, because historical things, there's a very minute amount of things that you can actually pull from, and that is a definite amount of things. But people come up with really, really unique committee ideas, and when you see overlap with that, it's a little sus, in my opinion.
But also the fact that you see it in such a close range of time as well. So, like a spring to a fall or a fall to a spring. And that gets frustrating for delegates on the circuit as well, because you don't want to do the same committee over and over. You want to mix it up. And also, but also when you see higher ranked tier teams, like a tier 2 or 3, taking a lower tier conference idea, I just feel like that higher ranked tier is going to get all the attention for coming up with a unique committee idea. And it is frustrating as a delegate who really supports low tier conferences, quote unquote low tier, who really enjoys the ingenuity that you see at those conferences, to turn around and see a conference where things are more cutthroat, they get a lot more publicity, there's a lot more, like, quote unquote clout surrounding the conference, and you see them with the same committees, like the bigger conference taking advantage of the ideas of the smaller conference. It just really frustrates me.
I 100% agree. And, like, to add some context, we have a small team. We're a ranked team, but we're not top 25. And so we really get it with teams that are a lower rank and conferences that are lower tier. And that's not to disrespect top 25 teams or the high rank conferences, because they're there for a reason. They're very, very talented. And, well, most of their delegates are very, very talented, and they have historically fantastic programs, and they have a lot of funding, and they work hard, and we're not disrespecting that.
They travel hard.
They travel hard. They work hard.
If we could do it, we would.
Exactly. But that's what you have to keep in mind, is the fact that the reason that a lot of these lower ranked, quote unquote, teams are lower ranked is because they don't have the funding, they don't have the team size, they don't have the structure within their school. And it's really difficult to see those teams that are inherently advantaged and talented, nonetheless, but inherently advantaged, benefit from teams that are inherently disadvantaged, but just as talented.
That's the tea.
That's the tea.
A powerful way to, do you guys have anything else to say on this?
Not really.
I have a little thing.
Go ahead.
So just as far as feedback goes, we have a whole lineup of things that we want to talk about. But we also really want to talk about things that you guys want to hear. So, we're going to keep on the guest train. Tomorrow we're recording another guest that we're super excited about. We're going to be announcing that soon. But, we want to hear about what you guys want to talk about.
We could do some Instagram polls.
Yeah, Insta polls. That's
and,
good.
See what people...
We've gotten many followings for you on our Instagram. So if you've gotten a follow from us and that's how you ended up here, hi, how are you?
It was probably us sitting around a table saying, do I follow this MUN program? Do I follow all of the members?
Am I on the public account? Am I on my private account? Let's triple check that before things get weird.
Exactly. But we really love user interaction. So the more that we can gear this towards what you guys want to hear, the better the podcast is going to be. So that's awesome. And also, if you're on a team and you want to be interviewed and do a remote sort of chat with us, or have us feature your team and talk about it and your experiences. Like, we'd love to be able to give spotlights to teams that are on the circuit, because it's not just us, it's not just our experiences.
Yes.
I'll be working out those technical kinks.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to figure out how to do that the best way possible, because we're learning as we go along, guys.
Oh, we are not sound engineers, shockingly.
No.
Does it sound like it? If you're hearing this now, we've probably already done Insta polls, because in my head I'm ready to do that right now.
I'm ready to do them right now.
So, overall,
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of changes, good and bad. I feel like things are getting more fierce, more competitive, sometimes in a detrimental way, but I think things are getting better for women on the circuit. And we can definitely go into that deeper.
More creative topics,
more
too.
creative.
I think it's all a result of MUN growing, which, for me at least, because I love it, that makes me happy. The more people that can have this in their lives, the better.
A growing market for this podcast is good.
Precisely.
Yes.
We want money.
Also, if you like this podcast and you're on a team, share it with your team.
Please.
Please.
If you run a conference and you want to sponsor us and we'll plug your conference, please. I want money.
But a wee podcast at this point.
I just want to offset the cost of the mic, man.
We say that every episode.
It's what I care deeply about, so.
We can each get one lavalier mic.
Beautiful.
And with that note, do I have a motion to end debate?
Motion to close debate.
That is in order. All those in favor?
Aye.
Debate is now closed. Hey!
Point of inquiry. What are your social medias?
You can follow us on Twitter at MUN01podcast, and you can also email us at MUN01.business@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of the MUN01 podcast. We hope to have you back soon.